the Asian community is so split, like we're not monolith in how we think politically. You kind of want to make it so, your personal political views are completely void of what you're sharing, right? Because the mission is not to push a political agenda. The mission is to bring awareness to the victims and their family to get justice.
Welcome to The Tiger in the Room. My name is Hannah, and I'll be your host. We are a podcast series that is here to talk about the current and ongoing national crisis of anti-Asian hate crimes. A lot of us first heard about anti-Asian hate in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe that hate against Asians and Asian Americans is not just seen in acts of violence. It is also seen when our community is silenced, invisibilized, and erased. We plan to talk about the challenges that modern-day Asian Americans face every day, whether it's in the workplace, in public, in media, and so on. We also talk to the organizers, activists, and change makers who are fighting for our community and fighting for change. We hope you'll join us. Our guest today is Jonathan Chang. Jonathan is an LA-based multidisciplinary designer and illustrator who specializes in doing illustrations of people, animals, and famous characters. On his website, he states he believes in using design and illustration for good to enact positive social change for all communities using the power of social media. He is also the artist behind hundreds of portraits of victims of anti-Asian hate crimes, which he started doing in 2021 with the murder of Grandpa Vicha Ratanapakdee. His work is perhaps the most recognizable of the Stop Asian Hate movement and is often credited for helping to spark broader awareness about this issue. We talked to Jonathan about what inspired him to start drawing these portraits, how he toes the line between raising awareness and not wanting to appear as if he's capitalizing on anti-Asian hate, and how he believes the community should not wait for permission to speak up. This interview with Jonathan Chang was recorded on August 26, 2023. Jonathan, I just want to make folks aware, for those who don't know, you're known for the portraits, as I had mentioned, but prior to the portraits, you had actually gotten involved pretty early on with the pre-mainstream Stop Asian Hate movement, design work that you did for They Can't Burn Us All, and I'm actually wearing the t-shirt today. That movement was started by China Mac and Will X Ham. We had Mac on the podcast earlier this season. Was that your first experience or involvement with, anti-Asian hate advocacy? And can you share a little bit about what that was like for you?
To backtrack a little bit from that, I got involved mainly from Will early on because I worked on the Andrew Yang campaign in 2020. And so I was the lead merch designer there. So that's how he found me. I did all the merch for the national campaign. And so during those hate crimes started happening, Will reached out and he said, hey, do you want to design a shirt for this movement that we're kind of building? And I saw the first draft and it looked pretty bad. So I was like, I can't let you guys go out with this. So it was a really, really quick design that we just made literally in 30 minutes, just so they can get it to the screen printers in time to make. So my main thing with that was trying to make something really iconic and really visually contrasting.
I actually did not know you had been the designer for the Yang campaign. I did see those the mascots that you designed. That was pretty cool. Can you talk to us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so the mascot thing was just something I did for fun, and I just posted on Instagram, and then I just tagged them, and through Instagram, their campaign, they really liked it, and then they reached out and said, hey, can we make this our official mascot? So they got me involved in that sense, and I ended up designing all their merch, and that mascot started being more integrated into their campaign as well.
I think there was a really unique way of, kind of seeing how Yang used that as part of his campaign. I think that's a pretty historic campaign to have been a part of. Did you ever think you were going to get involved at this level with, designing logo for the first real main, Asian American presidential candidate, and then all the work you've been doing that's helped with the Stop Asian Hate movement? Did you ever think that this was ever something in your future? And how do you feel about it now?
For my main source of work, I work in the toy industry. I've been doing that for the last 10 or so years. And so I've seen my stuff, on, retail, very surface level stuff like consumer products. So seeing my work in public isn't that new, but seeing it on stuff that's more movement based and community based, that was really new for me. And I think to circle back to the Yang stuff and how that got me involved in the Asian hate movement, when Yang was running, there was a lot of like very mildly, I would say, racist things happening in the mainstream media with him like people posting in the mainstream random photos of him that weren't him, just people that looked like him, or different people name entering from Google, like not giving him the light of day, and like even in debates, like not letting him speak up. So there's a lot of frustrations that I had, and I think a lot of Asian Americans had that were supporters of this campaign that was kind of like bubbled up inside. It was like not letting us speak out and like giving us the attention that we needed at the time. So when I saw all these Asian hate crimes happening, it kind of was similar in the sense of my frustrations of no one's going to care. It's going to get ghosted. Like, so I kind of still wanted to keep that momentum going.
I actually did want to ask you about that because I've read some interviews that you've done before where, you said you've always felt angry and restless with just kind of the lack of noise that was not being made around anti-Asian hate. And, in this case with even Yang, just how there was this double standard with how the media was treating Yang. Where does that come from for you specifically?
When I was a kid, I lived in Florida and I was like the only Asian kid, like in the 90s, like in that town. I think it was like in Tampa. And so I had a lot of experience growing up, like with not having any type of representation, any type of like people being sensitive to like, okay, well, I'm like a little bit different than you guys. And, being thrown into ESL classes when I spoke perfect English. There's a lot of like dumb stuff like that happened. So I feel like when I moved to LA and I felt like, people in LA have similar experiences, but not to that level. I felt in a national conversation, like people don't really talk about that kind of stuff. And even with like the Yang stuff, it's I understand like not everyone's going to support him, because it's still a political campaign. You can differ from him, but I felt like even our media, in our community, we weren't that supportive, like especially with the historical fact he's like the first Asian American man to run for president as a Democrat. I feel like that part was not really amplified enough. And it was just very critical. Like we found a lot of little clickbaity pieces to be critical of instead of just like thinking about what this means for our community in a moment in history.
Yeah, I remember when Yang was running for mayor here in New York, there was a lot of resistance to him running by people in our own community. There was even a petition that was going around that was literally called Asians Against Yang. Did you see that?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't that involved in the mayoral race, but I did see that on Twitter and all that. But like I said, a lot of it's very surface level. And I think a lot of it's also like, whatever the popular narrative is, I feel like as a community, we just kind of all bandwagon on that, right? Whatever is like the cool thing to do. Like I saw a lot of that stuff happening with Elizabeth Warren's campaign. There's a lot of Asian Americans banding behind her. And for a lot of the reasons that, I felt like we're very just in spite of Yang at the time. But, that's a totally different conversation. I'm pretty biased because I was a supporter for sure. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I felt like wasn't really necessary. And also, to touch back on, how this relates to the work I've been doing for the APAC community. I remember, because I was on the campaign team, we were organizing through Slack and everything. And I think during the first debate, we had like a Slack war room where we were watching debate live and trying to I was on the design team, so we were trying to figure out what some viral moments we could make into possibly merch or some type of cool graphic. But that time, like we were just sitting there waiting like for them to call on him. And then there was that moment where I was like, wow, like I felt like so invisible, like just looking at Yang and people just completely ignoring him for like what, 2 hours. And then so I've had that really, it felt terrible, like just sitting there watching live and then not being able to like see him making any like being able to say anything, right? And so I think that frustration, like I've always kind of felt it, like even all the way up until all these Asian hate crimes started happening.
So I want to shift gears a little bit to the work that you've done that's been so visible in the Stop Asian Hate movement. So I've read a lot of media on how you got started with this idea of drawing portraits of the victims. You had a friend that encouraged you to channel your anger about what was going on through your art. And I think suffice it to say, that was very good advice. I just was curious, when you uploaded that first portrait of Grandpa Vicha, tell me about, the response and how everything just kind of picked up from there and led to what you're doing now.
It was weird because it was during a time where no one was really talking about Asian hate crimes yet. And all we saw was basically all these more Asian-centric pages posting, security cam footage, little snippets here and there, someone getting beat, someone getting, attacked. And I felt like there probably was a better way to get attention for that instead of just like showing like the more gory parts of stuff, right? Like it's more just clickbait. I wanted to center around the actual victims of what was happening to instead of like just for having like video footage for people to put it on Twitter and then have political conversations around. Centering around the victim, I felt like was very, very important. So, when I got that advice from my friend Sarah, I think she also volunteered for a day camp rehearsal at the same time. And she was saying like, if you're like so frustrated, why don't you just channel that into, just doing a portrait and maybe some of us can start sharing it. And so for me, I thought it was just going to be like our immediate circle of friends sharing it on our profiles. But Asians with Attitudes, picked it up and shared it. And then it started going like really viral from there.
I remember there was it went viral on like Twitter and people were changing their profile pictures on Twitter and Instagram to that image. And I felt like it was kind of surreal because, I feel like for those of us who had also been seeing a lot of this footage come out in, these very pro-Asian pages, but wasn't picked up on mainstream media. Suddenly I saw all my friends changing their pictures to that portrait you did of Grandpa Vicha. And I was like, wow, we're actually coming together about this. Is that like the unique power of art? Because, I'm trying to kind of understand this myself, but it seems like there's something about when these victims are put in this illustration and you're not seeing, I guess, a picture, there's something that seems a little bit more approachable or something more relatable about that. Like, do you have any thoughts on that, on why that is?
I didn't really think of it as at the time, but, I did an interview with Gordon Tokumatsu in I think he's NBC and he was saying like the art was kind of more easily digestible. And I was like, yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense, right? Where it's like we're not showing this person where people see like photos of people all the time, right? You might just skip over it. But I felt like, just doing like a portrait in the way I did, maybe it makes it, a little bit easier to catch attention and why someone would actually do a portrait of this person. Oh, is this person famous? Like, why would someone do that, right? So I think that's part of it as well, where you make like this attempt to try to gain attention in a different way. And I'm also in these portraits, I don't really write anything political because I feel like a lot of posts that were happening at the time, people try to take a political angle to everything that they post. So all I do, I just posted and I just wrote on all the portraits, I just write what happened to them. And I just kind of leave it open-ended for people to discuss. And I feel like that's more, shareable, between communities rather than just saying, oh, I'm sharing this because I have this one political slant. And that's something that, I learned, working in the Yang campaign, just seeing like the inner workings and how people react to things. People will completely shut down like their brain if you put a political angle to it. And the Asian community is so split, like we're not monolith in how we think politically. You kind of want to make it so, your personal political views are completely void of what you're sharing, right? Because the mission is not to push a political agenda. The mission is to bring awareness to the victims and their families to get justice.
Yeah, and art is just something I think, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, I think we can all universally just look at an image and say collectively at what happened to this person was tragic. Mm-hmm. And I remember going to the rally in Times Square after Michelle Go died, and your images were on these, in Times Square, like billboards where you usually see, I don't know, like the next Marvel movie coming out. And it was these portraits of our community. I remember like standing there, and I don't know who said it, but someone said it either on social media or at that rally that said, why is it the only time you see Asian faces in a place like Times Square is when we're in pain or when we're being victimized? And, seeing the images and hearing that, it was, kind of such a chill down my spine because, we are so invisibilized in this country when it comes to just media representation. But, in that particular time after Michelle died and just, at the height of all these hate crimes, we were hyper visible, but not in a way I think we wanted to be. Did you hear that as well? Like, did you get that kind of like feedback from other people in the community?
That whole Times Square thing was pretty wild. It was very like last minute on my end. And actually, when I got the chance to do that billboard, I actually wanted to go like fly down Red Eye and go see it in person. But luckily I didn't because there were some errors happening with like the layout and like it almost didn't get made. So I woke up at like 4 a.m. to make edits to that layout and everything. So to get it done in that time frame. But the thing about that billboard, I think originally there was going to be a call to action or something, but I felt like it was way more visually impactful if we just showed a bunch of victims, right? And I think originally it was just going to be Michelle Go. So we had her front and center, but then I thought it would be a really good chance to show off all the other victims as well. So to keep that conversation going, to show that she's not a single statistic, like this is like a pattern that's been happening and no one's really talking about it. And there are a lot of people, on that billboard that people still don't talk about, right? There's Ely up there. There's, all these really violent crimes that happened. And a lot of them are also from New York. So I felt like it was something that was really needed for our community. And I'm really glad it happened. But I felt like there was some stuff that happened during that rally that, I've heard that people didn't like people were politicizing stuff. And, my involvement, that was mainly just to provide the backdrop, but I didn't know what was happening with the rest of that event.
I don't disagree with that, but you're right. I think the images, alone, were an extremely powerful visual statement, and reminded us of why we were there. Like the political stuff, was kind of just thankfully not really remembered, hopefully. But I think what really stood out for everyone who attended was the sight of those portraits just in the middle of a site like Times Square, reminding people of what was going on. So yeah, I think it was incredibly impactful. How do you, decide like what to draw when you decide on a portrait? Because I do notice sometimes your portraits feature, the injuries of the victim, or it just shows them kind of from an image that was taken a long time ago. What's the thought process behind like how you choose to portray someone who was affected by anti-Asian hate?
There's definitely a lot of reference images that, that are posted through news outlets, and that's usually what I work from. But there's also some edits sometimes I'll try to make to the portraits to make it look like they're more like in the moment, and trying to make them like stylistically look even more like warm, like with the colors. And that's why I choose like the colorful backdrops. And I started adding, I think I started with Vicha's portrait, like a little white halo stroke around them if they've, they're deceased. And the ones that I do amplify that are from people that are victims of attacks, but they survived. I don't have that white stroke on them. There was some negative feedback when I do ones where people have like visible injuries on their face and all that. And, I totally understand that. We're trying to like raise awareness, but at the same time, it could be seen as like desensitizing our audience and our community to, violence that happens to us. But at the same time, I think it's necessary for people to see it, especially like outside of our community, right? It's like when we're sharing stuff like that, it's important for other people to see that this is happening in our community. And it's, it's even till today, it's not stopping, like people kind of stopped talking about it, and people are now more like, this is my personal view. They're more concerned with more surface level shit, like, seeing more Asians in movies. I mean, it's not super surface level, but in the context of all these crimes that are still happening, it hasn't stopped. It's just people kind of stopped caring, right? And that's kind of like, for me as, someone that does like, art, I feel like a lot of the art that was coming out prior to all this was very surface level. It was just like, oh, there's some dragons, here's some like Asian patterns. It's like, what does that say about our victims that are actually experiencing this, right? So I was trying to act as somewhat as a middle person between like the actual victims and the families, and having them be shown in the media when so much of the media was not really covering it.
I can see that. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's still kind of this avoidance in our own community to want to still, talk about these issues, especially now, like you said, the media has kind of stopped talking about it. And it's really interesting how I think, honestly, I felt like a lot of Asian Americans either were not aware or just did not want to speak up until mainstream media chose to talk about it. Like with Grandpa Vicha's death, and we had his daughter, Montanis, on the podcast as well. And we talked about that, like how it's interesting how that incident is kind of what sparked the movement in a way. But it wasn't like, it wasn't hard to find out that there was a lot of this type of stuff going on before then. It's just, I think people were very, scared or maybe to talk about it. So that kind of reluctance is just something I think that is, it's interesting. I think it comes from a lot of places. There, I think there might be a bit of like shame culture associated with it.
There's actually, a lot of that goes behind that too, to unpack. It's like a lot of our community didn't really know a lot of hate crimes were happening until after Atlanta, right? So, because the mainstream media only started covering after Atlanta happened. right? The Vicha Ratanapakdee stuff, it was kind of more just big in our community, I think, and more Asian centric pages. But then even before Vicha, like we were like, with, they can't burn us all and proud as fuck to be Asian. We were out in the streets, like, yelling at the top of our lungs saying this is happening. And, when we had our rally in LA, like, I was kind of disappointed. That's like where I live, right? And we were trying to get all sorts of Asians to come out. And even like my inner circle of friends, I told everyone like we should come out and rally. And then a lot of them were like, oh, it's too hot. I'm like, it's hot. Like, come on, like just come out and rally behind it. And, one of the biggest takeaways that I experienced there was like when we were there with China, Mac, and Will, we all came out and we were volunteering, we were just like supporting. And what I did notice that was there are a lot of Black and brown people that came to, support us. And I was like, dude, it was like a super hot heat wave. It was like 120 degrees. And they were there out marching with us, in the streets. Right. And I was like, well, how come our community is out here doing this shit? But that we can all show up for Crazy Rich Asians and like spam that shit all over our Facebook and Instagram posts. Like, I don't understand. Right. So, but then after Atlanta, you started seeing a big wave of people starting, oh, since CNN or all these big major companies started like talking about it, okay, then I can talk about it. Our community always struggled with doing model minority stuff, but waiting for permission to speak out is the most model minority shit ever, right? So I feel like there is definitely a lot of frustration on my end, like seeing that and people thinking that Asian hate only started after Trump and then after Atlanta, right? Like it's been happening even since the beginning, like we started coming to this country, right? So it's very deep rooted. And I think with COVID and everything, like it just kind of went insane, right? People were just looking for scapegoats. And there's a lot of conversation about why people attack Asians. And I think, me personally, I think people want to just scapegoat us for a lot of stuff. And they knew, and like subconsciously, that the media would not cover it. It's almost like people wouldn't care if they attacked us. So I felt like a lot of the movement that we were trying to do is like really show that we do care. We should speak out about it. We should fight back. We should stand up, right? And not wait for the media to say when it's okay for us to speak up.
I agree with everything you said. I think that was happening, here as well. I remember going to the They Can't Burn Us All rally in New York, and I had friends who also were the same. They just, they just didn't want to go. I don't know. They were just cut. They didn't see the point. They just had this sense of like, look, this has nothing to do with me, really. Like, if you want to do it, that's great. I support you. Is like that kind of mentality. I think even as Asians, I think there's a part of us that really craves mainstream validation. And maybe that comes from the fact we still carry a bit of that feeling of like we don't really belong here, and we need to sort of be accepted in order to feel we can speak our truth. And there's a real thanklessness that comes with being people like you who just are doing this even when it's not trendy. And the emotional toll that it takes, like the toll on your mental health and everything, but still fighting for it because you see like this is so needed. Have you ever had moments where you just thought, yeah, this is too much, like I'm done?
When I first did the Vicha portrait, it was only supposed to be like a one-off. I didn't intend to keep doing it, but I kind of saw how it was bringing people together and like starting conversation. I felt like, hey, like, especially like doing They Can't Burn Us All, just trying to get people out there. I'm finding it kind of difficult to do that. And hey, if I can galvanize more people just on my own, just with stuff that I'm doing like on the weekends, then that's a win for me, right? I'm just going to keep trying to raise awareness on all of these, and all of these victims, they deserve the awareness, right? To be brought to their case. And, a lot of that, for me felt like a responsibility at the time. Like we needed it. It was like kind of like the time and place for it. Like we needed more and more and more, right? We needed the awareness. And, as time went on, it was just getting like personally, it was like, I don't really enjoy doing the portraits because they're very like heavy, right? To read through all the stories and how they were attacked and, the family they leave behind and everything. And there's part of me too, when I'm doing these, I'm just kind of hoping that people would, share and pick it up more and, really think about the victims instead of like using these to feel like a political agenda. And that's the one thing that I've always kind of hated about it. People would take these and then use the art and then put like a political angle to it, like in the captions, right? Obviously, that's, everyone's right to do that, but all I can do is just put the art out there and have people start a conversation around it. Because, if we don't do that, then, they kind of just get lost, right? People like don't really talk about stuff unless they see it in front of them. To be honest, it was pretty heavy. I tried to stop doing it like recently because, I felt like it started like having like a toll on my mental health, where it's like, for work, I have to do this really cool, fun stuff, and like switching gears like that so dramatically is really hard for me. And it did take, like a toll on a lot of stuff that I was doing. So I felt at the time it was needed, but it's not something that I prefer doing, to be honest.
I don't blame you. It's another thing about our community. I'm not trying to bash on our community right now, by the way. I'm just trying to point out where I think we can be better. And one of the things I think we can be better about is recognizing and uplifting those of us like you who are doing the work, and you're not looking to do this for your personal brand. You're not getting paid for it. Like you're not in it for anything other than just to get people to care. And like, there might be times you didn't feel like that was being completely acknowledged by the community.
It was hard for me because I was doing all this awareness building and stuff. And it was hard to balance that and then run a company, because maybe like that kind of attention is probably not good for business, right? Because it was starting to get really public, right? So I kind of had to choose, like, do I want to keep doing this, or like my activism stuff, or do I want to like just completely stop and just shut up, right? And I chose to just keep it going because I felt like our community needed to see this stuff. So, there is some like personal sacrifices that I made trying to get this stuff done. But sometimes when I look back on it, it's like, should I have done that? Because I feel like what you're saying, and at the end of the day, sounds like I feel like the impact is not very like recognized like on the mainstream. Because at the end of the day, when you look back on stuff, you're just going to see what mainstream media is going to start like pushing, right? There's a lot of more of the, I feel like more surface level stuff that came out of it. But there's part of me where it's like, I know a lot of my friends and family go, "Oh, you're like way too humble with this stuff. Like you should like claim credit for this and appeared on more stuff." And I was like, yeah, but me personally, I just felt like it's in bad taste. I didn't really want to do that kind of stuff right at the time. And I actually started appearing more on like news interviews recently because like Gene Kang, he's a Korean American reporter.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, like he reached out to me, like, I think last year or earlier last year, and he was like, "I want to get you on the show and do this live interview," but I was telling him like, "Can I do it like without showing myself?" And he's like, "Yeah, but then like our editors won't run the story unless there's like footage, right?" So I had to make a decision like, okay, well, if that has to be done, then I'll do it, right? But I try to always like keep myself out of it. And I think that's maybe that's why a lot of these orgs like they didn't want to contact me for anything, but. I'm pretty proud of the work we did, and I feel like it was needed at the time.
I respect that. Like, look, you're not going to do anything like is not comfortable for you. I mean, if recognition is not important, it's not important, and I think people respect that.
We're like our most hardest critic, right? That's like the most Asian thing ever, right? Self-criticizing ourselves on everything we're doing, and I totally understand, and it's kind of like very common in our community to not want to like start trouble and like speak out of line in a way, right? It's like there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes into that, and it's hard to unpack everything that goes into that. Like my mission at the time was just to make sure that we got these stories out. And I'm a pretty good example. Like I'm not a public figure or anything. I'm just doing stuff on my own time as community service, and that's the way that I could help. So for other people, hey, if you want to volunteer to local orgs and, help elders and, do street patrols, that's great too, but that's something that I could contribute at least. Right. So everyone can always do something rather than nothing.
That's very true. Very, very true. We can all do our own part. Let's actually talk about that, like how you've used your art actually to turn it into a way to provide a direct service to the community. So there was a campaign that you did, Fuck Around and Find Out, where you illustrated this grandma from the Bay Area who was attacked by this white man, and she fought back. And the video went viral. She, he was being taken away in a stretcher, and you illustrated that, and it became this viral illustration, and you even raised close to $38,000. For the Stop API Hate Community Fund. Can you tell me about that initiative and how, it differed a bit from the portraits you have been doing, and, what you got out of just doing something like that?
That one was actually something that I actually had fun doing because it was completely opposite of the portraits that I was doing. So it was more like to pay tribute and to kind of like, really commend the grandmother for fighting back, because we've been seeing our elders getting attacked, and we had this grandmother that is like, I'm not taking this shit anymore. I'm gonna like fight back and like get the hell out of here, right? So I felt like it was a time where our community needed that type of like strength and to see the resiliency of our elders, right? To like not take shit from that crap. So at the time, I just did this quick little chibi animation of her with a stick, and then I threw like the fuck around find out behind her, and it was just like a little animated GIF. Like it's just something fun, lighthearted to share. And I think a lot of people resonated with it, and they liked seeing like the image of like this badass grandmother, like get the hell away from me, type of thing. And at the time, like people, that whole thing was really strange because people were like, yeah, I need a t-shirt. Like I'll buy a t-shirt, blah, blah, blah. People just want it. It's just like, I want merch. Right. And, their first, inclination, okay, cool. Like I'll make merch. But I felt like I kind of don't want to do that because with my portraits too, they're all just community service. I'm just putting it out there. I'm not making money from this stuff. Right. And it felt like attaching merchandise to like an event that actually ended with like an elder getting, assaulted was, it's not in good taste. And I would not like that for even like, let's say if that was my grandmother. I don't want some dude making merch of my grandmother's experience. Right. So I had to really walk around that very cautiously. And so what I did was I wanted to use that viral moment to raise money for our community. So the first thing we did was I basically reached out to the grandson of the grandmother and asked him, hey, I have this initiative. What do you think about it? Do you think we can do this and I can donate the funds to you guys? Like that's 100%, like zero, like profit from our end at all. And then there was a lot of back and forth, and I think his grandmother and his family wanted to donate to the GoFundMe AAPI Community Fund because that disperses it through, I think, 200 different orgs in our community. So the organization was chosen by their family. So I'm like, okay, cool. So we got like the green light to do that. And my first thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to involve people, like all Asian, effort to do this. So I wanted to get like a Bay Area, screen printing company to do it and have everyone like just a full Asian like initiative to do this. So that part was actually pretty hard. Like I was like DMing people, and it was kind of like disappointing in the beginning because a lot of people that I reached out to, they wanted like profit out of it. And I was like, dude, no one's taking profit. And these are like Asian owned companies, right? And they want to profit from doing this. I'm like, no, like this is all community service. We're just doing this, and I'll pay for the cost of the shirts and everything, and we'll take it out of that. But no one's taking profit outside of any of that, right? And it took a while, and then Town Print, I think, reached out. They're like a Bay Area a couple owned a screen print company, and they're like, yeah, we'll do it. And so so we did that, and then we got Emily Leonetto like donating stickers and everything. So at the end of the day, it was like a fully Asian run operation, and I think we only sold it for like a week, and then we sold, I think we donated 38,000, which is like 100% of the profits. And then after that, we got I think I posted the initiative on my website, and then Eric Kim from Goodwater Capital, he did a donation match.
I think it's great you stood your ground. That I remember that campaign. I thought it was just a really clever and innovative way to just raise awareness and do good for the community in a really tangible way by raising money. And glad to hear Eric Kim match that as well. But how do you like toe the line between like raising awareness and not wanting to appear as if you're capitalizing on the incident for attention for your own personal brand? Because this trend has been kind of happening in the activism community where people are, especially when Stop Asian Hate became more mainstream, you did see activists starting to brand themselves as an activist for the Asian community. And like, let's be real, they were definitely getting paid to do some of this stuff, like speaking engagements, having merch and stuff like that. And look, I get it. You're not getting paid otherwise if you don't do stuff like it. But to your point, it's a little ironic that you're profiting off of the pain of our community to do that. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
That's definitely like something that I'm very aware of, and for me personally, that's why I try to completely disassociate myself with anything that has to do with like profiting off that kind of stuff. So for the Fuck Around Find Out initiative, it was basically 100%. We had all accounting, everything, all itemized. Like this is the amount of money it costs for shipping to all these people. This is the cost of everything. So we have all the paperwork and everything. And I think it was also a reaction to the trend at the time where you have all these different organizations and all these brands doing like Stop API merch, right? And it's like, but if you think about it, they never show where the money's going, right? Because they could be making all that money and saying, oh, we're donating 5,000, but that's 5,000 after how much that you guys took, right? And that's why I felt like the AAPI Community Fund, like what we donated, it's like directly into GoFundMe. I think we had to do like a wire transfer directly. So everything that I count was all just for that specific fundraising. So I think we kept our paperwork very clean, and we have like receipts for everything. And I felt like a lot of different brands, I'm like, I don't know like how much they're really making off this stuff, right? So it kind of felt weird to support that kind of stuff in my point of view. But yeah, it's definitely something that it's a very fine line where you're kind of like, you don't want to profit off of, someone else's pain, right? But at the same time, people want to support. And I feel like that's why I always encourage people to just do, community service, give their time, donate, like for me, I'm donating art, right? I'm trying to do art to raise awareness, or don't just donate your time, donate your whatever skills you have to help things that you care about.
That's a really good call to action. Transparency and accountability is really important. And look, it's not going to be perfect at the end of the day. I think we can acknowledge that, but I think it's kind of one of the unfortunate sides of this kind of newfound activism that a lot of people were doing after Stop Asian Hate became a larger movement. How do you think other Asian creatives can, contribute to the cause using their talents like you have? What are some suggestions specifically for other creatives in the space who want to get involved and use their art to promote awareness?
I think currently there are like a lot of Asian American artists that have been doing the work. I kind of went about it in a little different way, but there are a lot of people like making our stuff more mainstream, and there's a lot of progress that was made like recently, even like in movies and everything, that really show our culture from a non-surface level point of view, right? Showing like different different parts of our culture that aren't just very like like boba and like really surface level things. So I think the work is getting out there, but it's also like galvanizing a new generation of creatives to kind of push that. And also to like, when we're putting art out there, you have to always think about who are we making this for, right? So I kind of try to figure out a way where it's like, okay, this is something for our community, and not be unapologetic about it, right? So I don't think other communities have to understand why I'm drawing the things I'm drawing. I'm just drawing it for our community, right? So I think that's a very important thing for us as Asian American artists as well. It's like not having to censor or filter our stuff for a different audience.
Yeah, that's really powerful, actually. You raise a good point, actually. I think, and I've heard even some actors in Hollywood talk about when they make movies, for example, about Asian American stories, and it's not for the white gaze. I think especially as an Asian American, I think we can kind of tell as well, right? Because this is something like, yeah, I know this, I know this. Like it's almost like it had to take a person who understands what this is about to put it out there, if that makes sense. And I think honestly, what drew me to your work is quite honestly, I didn't see people really focusing on victims. Like there seemed to be, a lot of stuff on social media that seemed very careful, very filtered, very politically correct. And I'm not saying like portraits of the victims isn't politically correct, but for some reason, it seems still kind of a touchy thing to put that out there and be like, hey, like, look at what's going on. That kind of, like you said, not caring about what other people outside of the community think and just being like, hey, let's focus on our pain, our stories, the victims, our humanity. It really takes, I think, a certain amount of courage to do that, because I feel like a lot of us still are very hesitant to be that unapologetic, because I think we want to make sure like we're not saying the wrong thing or get canceled or things like that.
Yeah, I think for what I was doing, I tried to make it very personal. I kind of really didn't care what other people thought about it. So when I did the Vicha portrait, it was just something that I wanted to do. I saw like his photo being posted in all the news media, but I was like, okay, well, I kind of want to, pay tribute as well and say, hey, this is a portrait of a man that was murdered, right? And it's, the family still hasn't gotten justice for what happened. So I just really want to make sure that people know like these hate crimes have consequences and the families are dealing with it like forever, right? And for us, it might be just like a blip in our media feed, but for all these families, like this is like permanent. So I kind of wanted to really bring home to the severity of all these cases.
If anything, if history looks back, I'm more than confident that your work will be a huge part of that. Art like passes down, right? It's something that can be passed down for generations, and it's a way to commemorate certain very significant moments in history. So I'm fairly confident that that's what will happen with those portraits. And I'm just curious, is there a particular portrait that is like the most meaningful to you? And if so, like, can you share with us why?
Right off the bat, I'll probably say the Vicha portrait, just because the first one that kind of started all of them. And it was the one that people were actually changing their avatars to and like starting conversations around. And I still see people like online with those profile photos, like they haven't changed it since like 2021. So I think that's definitely a win that people are still trying to get awareness for these cases. But I think for me, it's not really one specific portrait, but when I start seeing all of them together, I think there's like 50 total, right? And just seeing all of them together in a group, that, I feel like that's really powerful to see what we've been through as a community in a short amount of time. I think that's, for me, it's not my favorite, but I think it's the most impactful to really just see the amount of faces and how every single person here has, family members. This is someone that meant something to someone.
Where do you see yourself going from here? You're taking a, rightfully so, kind of a break from doing this, but do you see yourself continuing this type of activism? Do you see yourself kind of, just letting your work speak for itself from here on?
I kind of took a break from doing the portraits. I think the last thing I posted was like the collage of the 50. I wouldn't say I'm going to stop, completely, but I feel like there's probably a time and place for it. I think at the time when I did these, I felt like it was the right time to do it and to get people talking about it. The main part was like getting awareness to it, right? But I think we're at a step now where it's like, well, what's the next step, right? So it's almost like, how do we get other communities to care? Because I feel like now our community knows it's pretty mainstream now. We all kind of know this is the thing. But now it's like, how do we have the right conversations around our community, right? And it's very nuanced. It's not very just one angle, right? Because we're very different. We all come from different backgrounds. There's a lot of, stuff that we have to deal with internally in our own community, whether it be like our own internalized racism or class issues and classist issues and stuff. And just really coming together as a community to unify. Yeah. And that's the hard part about our community, because we're not a monolith. For us to make any sort of political action, it's very, very hard. And it's also, our population numbers aren't the biggest in the United States. So for us to get anything really done, it's a very difficult thing.
That's really powerful. Actually, I did think of another thing I wanted to ask you. So you know of Amanda? She's the one who did the subway art. Do you know her, or have you spoken?
I've only talked to her a little bit, on Instagram, but I've never met her in person. I don't know her personally at all.
So you're aware of her art and how she's also another major artist who's been recognized for the work that she's done for Stop Asian Hate. One thing I've noticed, and I don't know if you feel the same way, I do feel she's more mainstream though, in terms of being like the artist for the movement. Like if you saw like the Time magazine covers, like her portraits were all over there, and she's big. Like she does speaking engagements now. Her work's now in a museum here in New York, in the Museum of the City of New York. But one thing I've noticed is that her portraits tend to be mainly of Asian women, and if not all Asian women. And for some reason, I don't know, her work seems very, very accepted, like just sort of like put on a bit of a pedestal, I guess you could say. While yours, I feel like, is known or it's recognized, but maybe not to that degree. Do you have thoughts on that?
I think it's like some of the victims that I chose, they're very not talked about. Right. And I feel I'm not sure if it's just like they don't want to talk about the case or the perpetrators involved or anything. Like maybe it's not as marketable in the mainstream. That's why I didn't do Atlanta victims, because it was so heavily covered that I felt like I was just like piling on to the stuff that was already out there. So a lot of the work that I did was like to uplift cases that weren't very public. I think what she's doing is really great, because we're still raising awareness on the issue. I think to talk about like gender stuff, I feel like if you look at all the cases that are amplified, I think there are a lot that are women. So I think a lot of people know about the cases that, are women that were attacked. But if you look at a lot of them overall, they're pretty like 50-50, right? Like Vicha Ratanapakdee, like I feel like outside of our community, it didn't get a lot of mainstream attention still, right? But I feel like everyone in America knows about the Atlanta shootings and everything. And I think that's why like it's more accepted probably. Like, and also at the same time, it's like, if you look at like, let's say Mother's Day versus Father's Day, right? More people are going to do stuff for mom than they're going to do for dad. And, for me, like I was raised by a single mother. So, I'm totally like, aware of like how strong mothers are and like, the resiliency and everything. So I think it's also like an emotional thing too, where it's like you want to protect the most vulnerable in our community. It's usually like women, children, and all that. So, and elders. But I feel like it's pretty 50-50 split. I wish we had more of that conversation, that it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And, hate crimes are hate crimes. It doesn't matter like who it's happening to.
You're right. I think some coverage that tends to get more amplified than others. And sometimes I think it's mainly because a certain story about a victim that's female or versus like maybe if the victim's like an older person might be received better in the media or not. What is the biggest issue facing Asian men right now in this country?
Asian as like representation, probably like in media, like good representation. I've heard some ERGs where someone asked like, "Oh, are we going to start seeing more Asian men in like romantic roles, or like in positive spotlight?" And then like I think one of the speakers was like, "Oh, yeah, BTS." I'm like, "But yeah, they're not Asian American though, right? That's K-pop, right?" And I think also a lot of it also has to do with like what's accepted for Asian men in our society, right? We see in Hollywood that a lot of more romantic roles, like the actor has to have a white last name for him to be accepted as like a romantic lead or have more like Western features, right? And I feel like we've seen like, even Tony Leung, like he's killed it in Shang-Chi, right? As like the dad, right? And there's all these like TikToks about like women like simping for him and stuff, but that's like another topic. But it's like we need to have more positive Asian representation, I think, in media. There's been a lot of like many years of big like little minstrel show stuff happening all the time, and I feel like that's accepted. And it's more of like speaking up when you see that kind of stuff and, calling it out, right? Because I feel like our community could do a better job of doing that.
Is there anything you think that Asian women can also do to be more empathetic or supportive of that?
Both groups can do more in like hearing each other out, right? So I know like I've seen a lot of toxic stuff fly around on social media all the time, but I feel like we can always just listen to each other's issues and not try to just like tear each other apart, right? And especially doing so publicly, right? I feel like that kind of stuff can be talked about more internally than putting on a show for other people to talk about our community. I feel like a lot of that stuff, there's a lot of baggage that comes with it. A lot of it comes from like probably personal relationships that people have had with their own, parents or whatever. So every case is very different. So it's kind of hard to like tell people what to do and what to think because everyone's, experience is valid, right? They all feel the way they do because the personal experiences they've had. But I think at the end of the day, we need to look at bigger picture. Like we can only be strong as a community if we uplift each other and not tear each other down and kind of see each other's point of view. Because there's always like a benefit and a con to every decision that we make, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's like historically that happened in this country that it does benefit certain genders over the other, but at the same time, it's like detrimental to the other one. So we see this a lot like in World War II, like, the War Brides Act and everything. And I think like I read something about like if you were a Japanese woman and then you were married to a white man, then you didn't have to be interned. And I was like, that's pretty crazy. And then if it was vice versa, if it was a Japanese man, you're married with like a white woman, then she's interned with you. So I think politically and like foreign policy wise, there's like a lot of stuff that we have to unpack, like as a community and see why we think the way we do, why society thinks the way they do, and why they accept certain things over others.
Thanks for speaking on that. I had no idea that there was this feeling of Asian men, being very aware early on about how like emasculated they are in this country and how they're very aware of just how they're not positively portrayed in media and representation. And, what that kind of does to you, I guess, like psychologically, if you grow up not ever seeing like positive masculine representations of yourself and what that can do to like your self-esteem. What was interesting was like over the last 3 years, meeting people like you in the space and meeting other organizers who were very just, very pro-Asian and very unapologetic about speaking out. One of the things I noticed was that it was more men than women who seemed to be more vocal about those things. And I'm not saying there aren't women, but it just definitely felt like the ones who were less filtered, more willing to kind of speak out and be, very early on with these movements it was a lot of men. I've seen like some theories behind that where, Asian men are more aware of how their Asianness is kind of used against them earlier on because of like history and representation and things like that versus like Asian women. who have been sort of granted like access to like white spaces more easily than Asian men.
The thing about Asian men too is like we can't marry and have a white last name, right? Like for me, I'm always going to be a Chang. I'm not going to, marry a white woman and like I have like a different last name now. So, and to speak to that too, I've had a white stepdad before, so I saw the very, very different view of how society views you when you have proximity to whiteness, right? And this is when I was really young, and I noticed it immediately, right? So it was like when I'm around with my mom, we get treated very differently. Like, oh, do you speak English? Or speak really like condescending to you. And then when he's around, then everyone's like, oh, everyone's so happy and everyone's so like cordial with you. So I noticed that right away. So even having proximity to that, it changes a lot about how you view the world and how you're treated. And so I could imagine like if you're, you have like a pretty traditional nuclear family and then you're treated a certain way, right? Then I can see how that can really frustrate you and bring out a lot of emotions. For me personally, like it doesn't really affect me. Like I've always been pretty comfortable with like who I am, but it's very different, especially in the time and age of like social media, right? Where people don't really meet face to face that much. Everything's online, to kind of start spiraling into like this void of like really negative emotions and having zero outlet. And I feel like that's why things like the Yammer Assault and Proud as Fuck to be Asian at the time, it was good for people to wear that and like to show everyone unapologetically, hey, we're Asian, so what? We're going to speak up about stuff that we care about. So it's not just specifically tailored to just Asian hate crime stuff, but it's also being comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah, 100%. There's challenges on both sides when it comes to the gender thing too, as to like what the stereotype is and how we're kind of put up against that, and what that, how that makes us do certain things or behave a certain way, or how comfortable we are just like, in our Asianness, like you said. That kind of dialogue I think is very much needed. And hopefully the more we get better about like coming together and speaking about these issues, we can also do that as well. But that, leads me to my final wrap-up question. What gives you hope, and what makes you keep fighting for the community?
When I first started this, I didn't really have much hope for our community because I felt like we just didn't care as a community about all this stuff, and we just kind of wanted to turn a blind eye to it. But I feel like after 2-3 years of this, I am pretty optimistic of our community. Kind of like we can see it. Like we came together, we shared all this stuff. We're doing all these initiatives. We're being more vocal about stuff happening in our community. And I feel like, because I'm a millennial and I feel like a lot of stuff like this, like it's not very easy to talk about for us, but I feel like newer generations or younger generations, they kind of have this more open dialogue about it, which, I'm really thankful for. So I'm really hopeful that we can keep this conversation going and start like calling stuff out as we see it and not be, filtered and apologetic about anything that we're saying.
I've seen it changing as well, even among like our generation and the younger generation. There's definitely a sense of now really, I think, owning up to that and just being like, look, we're not going to be quiet about this, right? We belong here, and we want to be treated equally. And being treated equally means validating our experiences as much as you do for other communities, right? And don't take advantage of the fact historically we haven't been good about demanding that space. To not give it to us. But, that's another thing. You do have to, in this country, you kind of have to ask for it. Otherwise you won't get it. And it's on us to demand it.
I think a lot of it too, it's like, our community has a lot of stuff internally that we're dealing with as well. And, a lot of it has to do with like, we need to like support Asian women supporting Asian men and vice versa. Right. So I think that's a big part of it as well, because at the end of the day, it's like, we're not going to change who we are, right? Like we can adapt to a Western society, but at the end of the day, when people view us, that you're just Asian people, right? And so there's no point like trying to like lose yourself to adapt to another culture and everything. Like you should be proud of who you are, right?
Yeah, exactly. You had kind of mentioned like some call to actions earlier, just getting involved, community service, volunteer, do your part. I'm going to throw in just try to do things without profit or thinking about how this is going to benefit you on a personal level. Let's try to understand each other without tearing each other down, especially in front of the white man. But is there any other additional call to actions that you would want to add to that to the Asian American community?
Avoid transactional activism or performative activism. Like just do it because you want to do it, right? I saw this especially with the Atlanta spa shootings, right? It's like the same people that I feel like didn't say anything. It's not like they didn't see all the Stop Asian Hate stuff. It's just they didn't feel like saying it, right? Until it was popular to do so. They saw their other friends doing it. It's like, hey, you can do shit without a bandwagon following you, right? You can do it on your own. So if you feel the need to speak up and it bothers you, you feel like it's important, just speak up about it. Like, even if it's like one person that sees it, like in your stories or whatever, at least people know that it is something that we need to talk about. And I'm a pretty good example of that because, you know, like I said, I'm not a public figure or anything. I just posted some stuff, right? Like, just as something I wanted to get out of my system and to really raise awareness within my immediate friend group. And it blew up to like all over, like nationally, right? Even internationally. So, you know, we can all do something. We never know where it could go.
And just to add to that, I'm just going to get kind of real here. I felt like you should have gotten a lot more praise for doing that too. Like and I say that because there's a lot of, you know, there's like Gold House and all these organizations that, you know, are having these like galas acknowledging people who have already kind of made it in, you know, Hollywood. And yeah, it's a lot of actors getting prizes. I'm like, okay, I think that's great, but I don't see them, you know, inviting people like you to get an award for literally raising awareness. People who are on the ground like you and, you know, Mac and just other folks, they don't seem to even get like half of that recognition by these groups.
At the same time, when I was doing these portraits, like people have asked me to go on. I've done a lot of interviews with like even CNN and stuff, and they've invited me to be on air and everything. But to me at the time, I felt like me being on camera is not really beneficial to anyone. Like I want people to look at these faces and just let the art speak for itself, right? So because at the same time, I'm not a professional activist. It's not my full-time thing. So I'm just doing community service. Like the art's there, just look at it and then you can make your own conversation about it. But I feel like maybe, you know, I think what you're talking about earlier, how some people, they kind of try to profit off stuff probably, like that kind of factors into why they do the things they do, why they make decisions they make. You know, these orgs that you spoke about, you know, they're aware of me. They all follow me and stuff. But to me, it's not that important, that kind of stuff. I'm just more happy that people have shared the photos and we're, you know, talking about, and, you know, it has made some sort of impact, I would hope. But yeah, I think there is some truth to that, where like we just want to kind of like uplift Asians that made it. And that's the thing that kind of bothers me too, when like brands and stuff get too intertwined with like social movements, because you're not even sure if they care or not, right? It's like that whole joke about all these corporate brands like uplifting whatever is popular at the time. And so I feel like it should come from a more organic place. And I think us as a community, like we can uplift each other in that way, and it feels more organic that way. I feel like for me, recognition-wise, the only recognition I really needed was basically the families like reaching out and saying thank you for uplifting or raising awareness on like my family. So I've gotten many of those, and for me, that's enough. You know, it's like I'm glad it made some positive impact and kind of helped them in their grieving process. I think that's the way it should be. You know, because these are people that have been directly affected by this stuff, and anything that can help them get through it. I feel like as a community, we uplift each other doing that, right? I think like going to movies and buying movie tickets, that's good and all for like that's more like a cultural thing. It does help. But I feel like for that Stop Asian Hate stuff, I feel like we should have focused around the victims even more.
On the next episode of The Tiger in the Room, we sit down with Eric Toda, Global Head of Social Marketing at Meta, and the head of Meta Prosper, which is a program dedicated to supporting AAPI-owned small businesses. Join us as we speak to Eric about his personal journey navigating his Asian American identity as a fifth-generation Japanese American, how he ventured into activism, the challenges he's faced, and his insights into the current landscape of issues affecting Asian Americans today. We also speak to Eric about his perspective on leveraging his position at Meta to become a vocal advocate for the community.